Welcome to our special podcast series for the 16 Days of Activism Against Gender-Based Violence, running from November 25th to December 10th, with your host, Charmin Prince. And together, we'll shine a light on some of the urgent issues.
I have Dr. Nwadinobi here with me today, all the way from Nigeria. And she serves as the president for the Widows Development Organization. I'm going to repeat that because I edit, so I can do that. She serves as the president of the Widows Development Organization and founding co-chair of Every Woman Retreat, a coalition that advocates for a global treaty to end violence against women and girls. Dr. Nwadinobi has worked tirelessly to end violence against women and girls in Nigeria and internationally. She was the first Nigerian to lead the Medical Women's International Association, MWIA, in its over 100-year history. Dr. Nwadinobi was inducted into Nigeria's Hall of Fame in the category of First Achievers. Oh, her personal profile is featured in Frederick Ebert Stefan publication, The Hands That Build Nigeria. Nigeria Women Role Models. Give a round of applause for that achievement. Can you imagine the first woman in a century? Oh my God. What a blessing. I am honored and I count this a privilege to be here with you a second time in a year. We were here 1 year ago, and here we are again. Thank you. And how has it been in the last year?
Oh, it has been busy. It has been a very rewarding time as I rounded up my 6-year tenure as president of the Medical Women's International Association. But such a blessing and a privilege to be given the opportunity to lead my colleagues globally. And a very humbling experience.
And you said humbling, and I just reverted on the way we were raised in South America, in Guyana, to be humble in everything. But there's some things, some achievement that we're allowed to be proud of. Mm-hmm. And to be the only in one century is a moment to be proud of, and to lead that organization in 6 years. Sister. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you for celebrating me. Thank you for encouraging me. What you have done is just show in a very real and, loving way, my mantra, or my, a famous saying that I got from my daily devotional that I love to share, that says, encouragement is like sunlight to a closed flower. So if I came on your special ENYTING Gender podcast with any form of my petals being closed on account of, anything that has been of concern to me. Your words of encouragement have come to me like sunlight to a closed flower, and I have no choice but to open up and embrace that light and that warmth that you have provided today. Thank you.
Thank you. I love that. I love that. That saying, that quote, that affirmation. Please send it to me.
I will.
So, welcome back to the show.
Mhm.
And here we are again, the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence. And we were here a year ago. And today, I want to say you're such a true force of change, working on the front lines in Africa for women who are facing domestic violence or any form of gender-based violence, and for women internationally, and for women in the medical space. So you are indeed a role model, and you're on the front lines, and I must commend you for that once again, for being on the highest levels of the international front with policies, for the policies that the places that you're sitting, that you can impact policies, not just for your nation, but for women all over the world, to create a safer world for us. So thank you. And I want to welcome you once again for the work that you've done, the work that you're doing, the work that you will do, and for what we're about to discuss today. Thank you for opening my eyes to it so that I can pay more attention, and for choosing me to have this discussion.
I have to say thank you to you as well for, providing this space to be able to discuss these issues that are not so easy to talk about, but for which we have to address. We need to lend our voice to violence that happens to women and girls because they are women and girls.
And what I love about what we are about to embark on, this discussion, is that usually our focus during the 16 days of activism is on women. We hardly highlight what's happening to girls. And here we have the opportunity to discuss something that is primarily that occurred with girls. And I want you to introduce to our listeners what.
So, a girl who does not have the opportunity to be in school is more vulnerable in the community. One, because she would not have the education that would help her to be resilient against violence, to be knowledgeable as to how to prevent violence, and have enough information as to how to report and where to get help. So moving along now, what we would call life's journey, as an adolescent, again, the young girl who is uneducated would not have at her disposal adequate information around her reproductive health and her reproductive rights. So a situation, for example, where a rural girl in a hard-to-reach area might not even have access to dignity kits. Therefore means that she may have her monthly period and have to stay at home so that she does not suffer any bullying, discrimination, or violence at school. Moving along, even for the educated girl, you find out that in some areas, because of early marriage and forced marriage, way before her body is ready to have children, she is married forcefully. That's a violence. Forced and early marriage is violence. And if she is below the age where her physical makeup is not ready for her to be able to carry a pregnancy or birth a child, when she then becomes pregnant, what happens? She may encounter a delayed or obstructed labor. And with obstructed labor, a girl is more vulnerable to fistulae. A fistula is when the head of the baby presses on the reproductive organs as well as the bladder and in sometimes the rectum, such that a hole occurs between the birth canal and the bladder. And therefore, urine that's supposed to come out through the urethra comes out instead through her vagina, where there is no valve. And what we experience is the same older man who has married a teenage girl, when she begins to leak urine and now she's ostracized in the community because she's smelling of urine, that same husband is the first to abandon her. And of course, in order to repair the kind of damage that obstructed labor that leads to fistulae is concerned, especially in countries in the global south where healthcare is not free, it's out of pocket, is inaccessible, it's, even to find a specialist is a difficulty, then you find out that the young girl lives in that shame, or she may even die at the end of the spectrum on account of having a fistula. So again, another form of violence, that violence of early marriage that leads to the deleterious health effects, that leads to, stigma and being ostracized in the community and not having access to affordable health care. Let's move it along now to a woman who is possibly in her marital home and on account of domestic violence is suffering beatings. And, we have studies that have shown that men will beat their wives in villages on account of things like the food was not ready on time, or the woman was out at dark, not minding that she had probably gone to fetch water, or she was delayed in fetching firewood. But she would be beaten, another form of violence, domestic violence. Fast forward to the subject matter that introduced me into the world of violence against women and girls, and that is widowhood. Women who lose their husbands at a time when they are mourning and in grief, mourning and grieving, where culture now imposes on them harmful practices on account of widowhood, where the widow is accused of being the one who has killed her husband, even if he was bitten by a snake or sadly died in a road traffic accident. She is blamed ultimately for that death. And she is now put through harmful practices. Some of these practices include forceful shaving of the hair, where the woman is shaved of all her hair, not of her choice, but because the culture says that is the outward show of mourning. A culture where the widow is incarcerated. She's not allowed to, let's say that she's a trader and going to the market is how she ekes out a daily living. She's incarcerated for varying periods of time, so she's not able to earn a living. We still have issues today around disinheritance, where the woman is treated as chattel. Whatever little property, be it household property or landed property, let's say she was farming on the family land, that land is taken away from her. And then we have, at the extreme, what is called the levirate. Levirate is still practiced where the woman is forcefully taken over, including sexually, by the next surviving male in the family, against her will. Again, another form of violence. In fact, I call it what it is. I say that is rape. So the culture forces her to be inherited as if she is chattel by the next surviving male. In the context of HIV and AIDS, again wearing my hat as a health practitioner, you can imagine that if the man died of AIDS and the diagnosis was not known because healthcare access is an issue, his wife may, now we don't want to label wives as carriers, but in case he had the virus and his wife is carrying the virus, if she is forcefully passed on to the next surviving male, what does that do to the disease? It might not be HIV, it could be another sexually transmitted disease. Again, that practice means that the sexually transmitted disease rises exponentially in the family. And when the woman is sick, what does she do? She has her children to look after, and she will probably be the last to seek medical help because she wants to keep going. for her children. So what I've tried to do is to look along the lifespan, the life course of a woman who is in a rural or hard to reach area, and the different levels of or touch points of violence, and in some cases, layered violence. This year, the 16 Days of Activism is focusing on us uniting against cyber violence. So let us now, if I may, move to another class of women who has access to internet, has access to cyberspace. Statistics tell us that 58% of women have been victims of cyber violence. 58%. Let me give you another statistic. 90 to 95% of deepfake videos are sexual images of women. 1 in 4 journalists. This is coming close to home because of the incredible work that you are doing, Charmaine. 1 in 4 journalists have actually received internet-related death threats. So we are undergoing an existential threat. Hence, the importance of the 16 days of activism between the 25th of November, which is the day for commemorating the bringing an end to violence against women and girls, up to the 10th of December, which is Human Rights Day. But I always emphasize the 16 days heightens awareness, but every single day of the year and of our lives should be a time when we spare a thought, speak up, and more importantly, act on behalf of women and girls who suffer violence.
Yes, thank you. As I listened to you, I remembered when I first started the 16 Days of Activism in 2020, and there was someone who was advocating for widows. I was shocked at the way widows were treated. She was working with the widows who was ostracized and placed into a community by themselves. And I'm thinking of, how do you, as an advocate, intervene on their behalf and show support?
A very practical question, which as a frontline activist, as an advocate, and as a human rights defender, has been the work that we, and I want to emphasize we, because it takes a village. It takes an army of activists. We can never face the front lines on our own. I'm known famously for saying we do it with our elbows locked. When you imagine how we can lock our elbows arm in arm to face the front lines, what did we do practically? I remember my first experience of this in 1994, where a young girl, a friend, lost her young husband in a car crash, and we had gone to the village to visit her. Now, we belonged to a fellowship in the town, but once her husband died, she was relocated to the village. And we went to the village to pay our condolences. And we walked into her home asking for her, only for those within the home to point us back outside to someone who we had walked past, thinking that the person was either a mentally challenged woman or a woman living on the streets. We did not recognize our friend who, when she's with us, dressed to the hilt in her heels and painted nails, but in the village, she was sitting on the bare earth, covered in sand. Her hair had not been combed from the time her husband died, and we had gone to visit her probably a week later. So we didn't recognize her. And as with our, I in particular, that was what woke me up. Just the thought that she was unrecognizable. As we got to her, the first thought that came to my mind was, sit down in the sand with her. And that's what we all did. We decided that if the culture had forced her to sit in the sand, we were sitting with her. And we sat with her and prayed with her. And that started the activism for widows' rights for me personally. But here's the thing. Upon asking questions, and then upon doing an independent research, that was when I came to know that it was a culture in that particular village. And what is culture? Culture is a way of life that is handed down from generation to generation. But culture changes with times and seasons. Thus started our going into the village, the army of us, those who were like-minded, going into the villages with a megaphone and announcing to the villagers that this is a violation of the women's rights. We were walking around with a megaphone, and then we became more strategic. We then went to the traditional leaders, the custodians of the culture, and we were fighting against the grain of the culture. So, of course, we put our lives at risk, but we were single-minded in saying, these women are human beings. They're being dehumanized and treated in an inhuman way. A woman needs to have a wash. Every human being needs to have a wash. But more women, especially when they're having their monthly periods. So for forcing them not to bath for varying periods, saying that they shouldn't comb their hair, putting on black clothing, in some cases covering them in sand. We were speaking up for those who could not speak. So that was advocacy. That was identifying. That was, like the sitting down in the sand was saying, We feel you, we see you. And then going to the custodians of culture. And then we went to the custodians of religion because in the communities are very religious. And if we can get to a pastor or priest or head of a church who can spread this message on the pulpit, then we took it yet another step further. We documented our findings. We began to say, in this area, this is the prevalent practice. In another area, we, at that time in 1995, came across women who were told when they are mourning their husbands, they mustn't eat protein. We came across women who were told that for that one whole year, they must wear black. And then those who couldn't go to the market. So we started documenting this practice is prevalent in this area. And then we had a compendium of our independent findings. It was not highly scientific. We were not looking at figures, but we were looking at facts, and we were looking at stories, we were looking at testimonials, and those were documented. We took that the next step and we published our findings. And then we began to use those findings to speak up. And I'm grateful to your constituency, the media constituency, because they amplified our voices. They gave us the space. We didn't have podcasts then, but we had mainstream radio. We couldn't afford television. You had to pay for television. And then the next step was we now began to work. In 1999, Nigeria now returned to democracy. When we started, it was military rule. Once we returned in 1999 to democracy, we had a parliament that we could go to. The army of activists shared, and spoke up loudly about our findings. And the parliament listened. With the help then of development partners, these parliamentarians worked with us to draft the very first law in one of the states, Enugu State, in 2001 in Nigeria, the first state to pass a widow's rights bill. There's a funny story to that as to the power of advocacy. The entire parliament consisted of men. And when the bill came before them, they said, "Oh, we're talking about widows. How about widowers?" And so they put the word widowers in the bill. But we were fine with that, even though in our comparative study, a man losing his wife is said to be lonely, and the culture would provide very quickly a young girl to keep him warm. And on the contrary, a widow would suffer the practices that I've shared with you. But the bill, as it was passed on International Women's Day, 8th of March, 2001, has the bill for the prohibition of harmful practices against widows and widowers. we were fine with that because it meant that widows were protected. 14 years later, we took it to the next level, and a law was passed in 2015 in the Nigerian National Parliament, outlawing widowhood practices, sexual violence, and other types of violence, female genital mutilation. It took the army with our elbows locked 14 years. And that is why I am motivated today to now be working on the global stage for a global treaty to end all forms of violence against women and girls.
What a journey. It was rewarded. I hope that your activism, your advocacy can be shared with in countries like Uganda, because they have some of the same practices and even more stricter and abusive to women. You meticulously outline every step of the woman's journey and the type of abuse faced in every phase. Remarkable. The information that you've provided have encouraged me to lend myself more to activism and advocacy, because we live in this technological and instant age that we want to see results quickly. And when we lock elbows, it may not be instantaneous, but it will be.
Amen.
It will be. So it is such an encouragement listening to you, and I'm sure our listeners also. What is next on the agenda for you?
For me, my work continues until there is a global treaty to end all forms of violence for women of all vulnerabilities, because there are layers. I've spoken about widows, they're wives of the disappeared, they're people living with disability, they're different vulnerabilities. And I had the opportunity as International President for Medical Women to traverse the globe. And for every single airline that I had the opportunity of using, the message went out loud and clear. Smoking is not allowed on this aircraft. There are smoke detectors in the toilet. Do you know why? Because there is a global tobacco treaty, and any airline in which any of the passengers is found smoking, that airline takes the responsibility, and that airline is going down because there's a global tobacco treaty. I want to continue working until we have this global treaty so that violence against women and girls will be relegated to history books. No girl, no woman, no human being should go through the kind of violence that we see women and girls going through on account of being born a girl who grows up to be a woman. Let's end femicide. Let's end violence, period.
And this has been a special episode of the ENYTING Gender podcast. See you next time.